The invitation arrived as a calendar alert on Clara's tablet dinner at Beastro Laurel, 7:00 p.m. Thursday. Topic: long-term planning. At 69, Clara spent her quiet mornings pruning heirloom hydrangeas and cataloging pressed specimens in the bright sunroom Thomas had built before his passing. She understood the cadence of her son's household perfectly. When David sent a message, it was gentle and brief. When Valerie scheduled an event with an agenda, an expectation was already moving forward. 2 days earlier, Valerie had stopped by Clara's craftsman house under the pretense of borrowing an iron roasting pan. While Clara searched the pantry, Valerie walked through the living room, running her fingers along the cedar mantelpiece. 4 bedrooms is a heavy burden for one pair of hands. Clara, Valerie said, her voice bright and rehearsed. Heating empty corners during an Ohio winter is practically throwing retirement funds directly into the wind. Clara handed over the heavy pan without defensiveness. Thomas insulated the walls with double batting. The house stays warm on very little, Valerie. Still, maintenance adds up, Valerie replied, tapping her manicured nails on the counter. Young couples struggle to find starter lots with yards like this. It's about efficiency. Clara noticed Valerie had left the kitchen drawer slightly ajar after looking inside. Later that evening, Clara checked the ceramic dish near the refrigerator. The brass spare key was missing. Instead of calling David to complain, Clara walked out to the garage, retrieved her toolbox, and replaced the back door's lock cylinder with a new one she had kept in her toolbox. She did not raise her voice or send an angry message. She simply pocketed the new keys and put the kettle on. She locked the new deadbolt from the inside, walked into her quiet study, and began making her own methodical arrangements for the upcoming family evening. On Sunday afternoon, David visited alone under the guise of dropping off lawn fertilizer. He stood in the hallway, shifting his weight between his work boots, smelling faintly of sawdust and anxiety. He was 34, an architectural drafter who spent his life smoothing rough edges and avoiding confrontation. Mom, Valerie was thinking we could help you clean out the basement next weekend, David said, avoiding her gaze. She found a junk hauling service with reasonable weekend rates. Clara wiped down the kitchen counter with a damp linen cloth. There is no junk in my basement, David. There are your father's hand tools, my canning jars, and your childhood sketchbooks. Valerie says keeping everything stored creates mental clutter. He murmured, picking at a loose thread on his jacket sleeve. She thinks downsizing in stages makes the eventual transition smoother for everyone involved. The transition to where? Clara asked, her voice even and calm. David swallowed hard. To a condo, maybe. Something single-story near the medical district. Valerie's looked at floor plans online. The building has an elevator and an indoor pool, and the unit would require no yard work. Did you look at those floor plans, David, or did Valerie show them to you? David hesitated, his eyes darting toward the garden window where Clara's prized perennials were blooming. She's just trying to manage our family's future before interest rates climb higher. We're carrying credit card debt from our home remodel mom. Things are tighter than we let on. Clara did not offer a check, nor did she scold him for reckless spending on custom kitchen cabinets. She simply poured him a glass of iced tea and placed it squarely before him. A mother's home is not an insurance policy against poor financial planning, David, she said softly. David stared at the condensation forming on his glass, unable to offer any reply. He finished his drink in uncomfortable silence, excused himself hastily, and walked out to his idling truck without asking why the back deadbolt looked completely different. For 5 years, Clara had hosted Tuesday dinners for David, and Valerie cooking elaborate pot roasts and packaging leftovers into glass containers for them to take home. She also paid the family cell phone plan and stored Valerie's seasonal wardrobe boxes in the upstairs spare bedroom. On Tuesday morning, Clara packed Valerie's 6 plastic storage tubs into the trunk of her station wagon. She drove over to their split-level house on Maple Street, while David was at his drafting firm. Valerie answered the front door, wearing silk loungewear, holding a mug of freshly brewed specialty coffee. She looked surprised to see Clara standing on the porch holding 2 large plastic containers. I'm clearing out the guest room to set up a botanical potting bench. Clara explained pleasantly, setting the bins near the entryway. I brought back your winter coats and ski gear. Valerie's expression tightened around the eyes. You could have left them upstairs, Clara. We don't have closet space here until David finishes reorganizing the attic. Then this is a good opportunity for you to sort through them, Clara said with an untroubled smile. Also, I won't be cooking dinner tonight. I joined a botanical preservation workshop at the community college that meets every Tuesday evening. Valerie took a slow step back, clearly annoyed by the disruption of her weekly free groceries. David had his heart set on your beef stew tonight. He's stressed about work. David is an adult who knows how to use a slow cooker, Clara replied gently. I'm sure you two will manage a wonderful meal together. Valerie stared at the bins cluttering her spotless foyer. She had spent years treating Clara's space as an extension of her own household. Clara walked down the driveway, feeling lighter with every step toward her car. She drove back across town without looking once in the rearview mirror, fully aware that establishing firm personal boundaries was not an act of hostility, but a necessary defense of her self-respect. The mail carrier arrived on Wednesday at noon, slipping a stack of envelopes through the brass slot. Among the utility bills and seed catalogs was an official folder addressed to Clara Jensen, property owner. Clara sat at her dining table, using a silver letter opener to slit the seal. Inside was a market valuation report from an independent real estate agency, complete with exterior photographs of her home, an estimated market value, and a stamped note prepared at the request of Valerie Jensen for immediate estate planning evaluation. Valerie had not merely formed an opinion. She had engaged a professional appraiser to walk Clara's perimeter, calculate its square footage, and estimate its potential sale price. She was already treating Clara's home of 42 years as liquid capital waiting to be unlocked. Clara did not tear the papers in anger. She smoothed the pages flat, noting the numbers in the margin. The house had zero debt. Thomas had paid off the 30-year mortgage 3 years before he died of pancreatic cancer. Every floorboard had been varnished by his hands. Every window frame had been caulked against the biting lake winds. While reviewing the file, Clara heard a vehicle pull into her driveway. It was Valerie holding the stolen spare key in her hand, trying to turn the lock on the back door. The metal refused to budge. Through the frosted kitchen glass, Clara watched Valerie jiggle the handle with increasing frustration before realization set in. Valerie stared at the new lock cylinder, then pocketed the useless key and stormed back to her luxury crossover. Clara took a slow sip of water. Valerie's entitlement was not born of malice, but of a deeply ingrained belief that older relatives existed to absorb the financial mistakes of the young. Clara stood up, retrieved her telephone, and dialed a number she had not called in 2 years. It was time to speak with Eleanor, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise Valerie after her own mother vanished. Eleanor arrived at Clara's porch carrying a tin of almond biscuits. At 66, Eleanor ran a tailoring and alterations shop on the south side of town. Her fingers were calloused from decades of threading needles and handling coarse denim. When Valerie's mother abandoned her at age 7, Eleanor took the girl in, spending her modest savings on tuition ballet lessons and braces, while remaining single in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. They sat at Clara's kitchen table, the real estate appraisal folder resting quietly between their teacups. She came to my shop on Monday, Eleanor admitted, looking down at her worn hands. She asked if I had equity left on my building that I could borrow against to help pay off David's renovation debts. When I told her the shop barely covers my property taxes, she called me selfish. Clara refilled Eleanor's cup. She believes family means total surrender of whatever assets we hold. I built that monster, Clara. Eleanor whispered, her voice heavy with regret. When her mother left, I wanted so desperately to prove she was loved that I never told her no. I slept on a pull-out sofa for 10 years so she could have the large bedroom. I sold my mother's pearl necklace to pay for her senior trip. I taught her that love is measured by how much the older generation bleeds. You gave her shelter and safety, Eleanor, Clara said gently. What she chose to make of that generosity is her own moral failing. She doesn't see theft as theft, Eleanor sighed. She sees it as collecting what she thinks the world owes her. She invited me to dinner tomorrow at Beastro Laurel to present a contract, Clara said evenly. She expects me to sit there alone, vulnerable and guilt-ridden. Eleanor looked up, her tired eyes sharpening. Then do not go alone. Clara reached across the table, took Eleanor's weathered hand in hers, and nodded softly. Together, they made a quiet plan, one that required no shouting, only firm resolve. On Thursday morning, David called Clara from his drafting office. His voice carried the strained tone of a man trapped between his marriage and his conscience. "Mom, about tonight." David started pausing as office printers hummed in the background. "Valerie booked a private corner table. She's really stressed about our finances. Just listen to what she has to say with an open mind. Okay?" Clara sat at her desk, organizing her botanical preservation folders into neat, chronological stacks. An open mind about what about maximizing the family's assets, he replied, repeating Valerie's exact words. "The market is at an all-time peak. If we sell your property now, we can clear our short-term liabilities, buy you a comfortable maintenance-free unit, and invest the surplus into a trust fund." "And who would manage this trust fund?" Clara asked smoothly. David stayed silent for 5 seconds. "We would manage it together." "You mean Valerie would manage it?" Clara corrected him without raising her tone. "David, did you tell your wife that your father and I bought this land with cash earned from extra shifts at the state laboratory? Did you remind her that I planted every oak tree in this yard?" "Mom, things were different 30 years ago," David argued weakly. "People don't stay in oversized family houses forever." "I stay because it is mine, David," Clara said firmly. "I am 69, healthy and capable of deciding where I live. If you are struggling with debt, you should look at your lifestyle expenses, not my deed." David took a ragged breath. "She's my wife, Mom. I have to support her. Supporting your wife does not mean helping her strip your mother of her home," Clara said, and gently replaced the receiver in its cradle before he could answer. She straightened her woolen blazer, checked the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, and walked calmly out to the car. It was time to pick up Eleanor and drive toward Beastro Laurel together. Beastro Laurel was an upscale restaurant featuring dim ambient lighting linen tablecloths and soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Valerie had chosen a secluded booth in the rear dining room, providing maximum privacy. When Clara walked in wearing her tailored navy coat, Valerie greeted her with an effusive smile, rising to kiss her cheek. David sat beside his wife, looking pale in a pressed button-down shirt, nervously spinning his water glass. "Clara, thank you so much for making time," Valerie said smoothly, motioning toward the empty velvet chair opposite them. "We ordered the artisan bread basket and a bottle of sparkling water for the table." "Good evening, Valerie." Hello, David," Clara said, hanging her coat neatly over the chair back. She sat down, maintaining an unhurried, steady posture. The server arrived to take their entree orders. Valerie ordered cedar plank salmon without looking at the prices, while David requested a simple bowl of soup. Clara ordered roasted vegetable risotto. As soon as the server walked away with the menus, Valerie opened her leather handbag. She pulled out a crisp quitclaim deed and a gold fountain pen, setting them squarely on the tablecloth between Clara's bread plate and water glass. "Let's not dance around the reality of things, Clara." Valerie began leaning forward with practiced warmth. "David and I spent hours consulting financial advisors this week. The smartest move for this family is to transfer ownership of the house to us. We will handle all property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs." Clara looked down at the document without touching it. Her name was typed in bold black ink beside a blank signature line marked with a red sticker. "And my living arrangements?" Clara asked quietly. "You'll have a lifetime right of occupancy in the garden guest suite," Valerie promised quickly. It could help protect the property from certain future medical claims while allowing David to build equity now. Valerie pushed the pen closer. It is simply the most logical choice for all of us. Valerie rested her manicured fingertips against the legal contract. You don't need an entire 4-bedroom house anymore, Clara. Thomas is gone. Holding on to all that space when David is drowning in debt is sentimental selfishness. Sign the paper. This is what mothers do when they genuinely love their children. Clara did not flinch, nor did she reach for the pen. Instead, she turned her eyes toward her son. David, Clara said, her voice cutting cleanly through the ambient chatter of the restaurant. Look at me. David kept his head bowed, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his linen napkin. He could not lift his eyes to meet his mother's steady gaze. Is this what you want, David? Clara asked. Do you want me confined to the garden guest suite of the house your father built, so you can use the property as collateral for your credit card debt? Before David could form a stammered excuse, Valerie intervened, tapping the paper impatiently. David agrees with me, Clara. He just doesn't like conflict. Don't try to guilt him. Sign the title transfer so we can record the deed before the county office closes tomorrow afternoon. Valerie slid the house papers across the table and told Clara to sign. She thought Clara had come alone until the woman behind her said, Take your hands off what isn't yours. Valerie froze, the color instantly draining from her face. Eleanor stepped out from the arched hallway beside the maitre d' station. She wore her dark Sunday dress, her posture upright and unyielding as she stood directly behind Valerie's booth. David gasped, dropping his fork against the porcelain plate with a sharp ring. Valerie slowly turned around in her seat, her voice cracking with shock. Aunt Eleanor, what are you doing here? Preventing you from taking what does not belong to you, Eleanor replied, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. She pulled out the adjacent chair and sat down beside Clara, looking straight into Valerie's eyes. Eleanor did not shout or make a public spectacle. She placed her hands flat upon the white tablecloth, her gaze fixed on the young woman she had raised from childhood. Do you remember the pull-out sofa in our old hallway apartment, Valerie? Eleanor asked softly. I slept on those broken springs for 10 years so you could have a bedroom of your own. Valerie's throat tightened, her defense flaring. You chose to do that, Aunt Eleanor. You did that because you loved me. Yes, I chose it freely, Eleanor answered, unblinking. Sacrifice is only love when it is given freely by the one who bears the cost. The exact moment you demand it as your entitlement, it ceases to be love. It becomes extortion. Valerie looked between Eleanor and Clara, her breathing shallow. She sought refuge in David, gripping his arm. David, tell them this is about our family stability. Say something. David finally raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed with humiliation. He looked at the legal document, then at his mother's calm, resolute face. Clara spoke before David could stammer. I raised you to be a decent man, David. Not a man who hides behind his wife while she robs his mother. You stayed silent tonight because you were afraid of domestic friction. But neutrality in the face of injustice is cowardice. Clara slid the quitclaim deed back across the table. I will not sign away my home, Clara stated with finality. If you need debt counseling, I will pay for your first session with a certified credit counselor. But this house remains mine until the day I am buried. Valerie snatched her purse, pushed past Eleanor without another word, and hurried toward the exit. David remained frozen in his chair, completely unmasked. Clara looked at her son, paid the server for her meal, and walked out into the cool evening air alongside Eleanor, leaving David alone to face his own choices. 4 months passed through the quiet thaw of late winter into early April. Clara spent her afternoons expanding her greenhouse seedlings and teaching a weekend botany class at the Botanical Conservatory. She did not chase after David, nor did Eleanor call Valerie to offer unearned comfort. For the first time, Valerie had to navigate the consequences of her behavior without elders stepping in to cushion the fall. David had taken a second drafting contract to manage their renovation debts. He visited Clara every other Sunday, arriving on time and helping with yard work without offering unsolicited advice or asking for money. Their relationship was rebuilding slowly on honest, quiet terms. On a cool Saturday morning, a car pulled into Clara's gravel driveway. Valerie stepped out alone. She was dressed simply in jeans and an oversized cardigan, her posture subdued without the manicured arrogance she had displayed at Beastro Laurel. Clara stood on the front porch, garden trowel in hand, watching her approach. Valerie walked up the timber steps, stopping at the threshold. She opened her palm, revealing the brass key she had taken from the kitchen months ago, along with a small spiral ledger containing their documented debt repayment schedule. "I went to see Aunt Eleanor last week," Valerie said, her voice shaking slightly but clear. "She didn't let me inside, but she spoke to me from the porch. I realized that my whole life I confused being loved with having a claim on everything people owned." She set the key and the notebook on the small porch table. "I'm returning this. I don't expect things to be normal, Clara, but I wanted you to know that we're paying our own way." Clara did not offer an immediate embrace, but she set down her trowel and stepped back, holding the door open. "Come inside, Valerie," Clara said gently. "I'll put on some tea." Reconciliation would take time, but for the first time, the open door no longer felt like surrender.